easy. It took a lot of paperwork. Things for him to fill out, things for us to, it was a big hassle, but we did it. 2 months later, he got appendicitis. He had to call an ambulance. He had to go to the hospital. He had to have his appendix removed. He had to stay in the hospital for 3 days. $52,000 was the charge. But he was on my health insurance. We paid $500. The insurance paid $51,500. Without Obamacare, Daniel would have had to declare bankruptcy because he would not have had $52,000 to pay. So now maybe you have a sense of what my preconceived idea is about the effectiveness of Obamacare. Look, the main thing that Obamacare has done has been enormously effective. The main purpose of Obamacare was to have fewer people without health insurance. And it has been enormously effective. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the percentage of Americans without health care has gone from something like 25% to 15%. Something like that. I might have the numbers a little off, but it's been quite a dramatic change. So that's been a big thing. And then in states that have accepted the Medicare expansion, which is largely funded by the federal government, some states have accepted it. Some have rejected it, not because it's bad. In fact, it's fantastic. But they're Republican states, and they don't want to do anything that might make Obama look good. So there's a big difference between states, with the ones that have embraced the Medicare expansion having included even more people in health insurance coverage. Now, the next question, there are two more questions that we would ask. One, are people healthier? So I think, if memory serves me, there is some indication that that's the case, but it's really too soon to say. The last question is, what about costs? Because another problem with American health care is it's way too expensive. It's ridiculously expensive, as you can see from being charged $52,000 to have your appendix removed. So there were concerns that costs would go way up under Obamacare. In fact, costs have not risen as fast as before Obamacare, and in some cases, costs have gone down. So I would say reducing costs was not the main focus of Obamacare, but certainly things have not gotten worse under Obamacare. So I would say overall, extremely successful at the main focus of the policy. And then some additional successes. And what we'd really like to know is how it affects people's health, and we'll have to wait some time to see that.
Still? Okay, one more? Yes. Back to education. I assume you noticed the major results from the OECD PX survey, which was published recently by OECD, Andreas Schreiber. Here's mainly the analysis of educational mobility. And surprise, surprise, it's not increasing. Actually, it's decreasing, right? And there is no explanation so far.
You're talking about here in the Czech Republic?
Everywhere, almost everywhere, even in the United States. And now, I mean, this is the fact.
Yeah.
Now, he doesn't provide, so far, any explanation for it. This is just a fact. Now, I guess there might be three explanations. I would be interested in your interpretation. First, structure. We already hit the ceiling. There can be more mobility, upward mobility, especially because so many people actually attain already the higher education. Maybe it's not the most important explanation. Second, you said, and it's true almost everywhere, economic inequality is increasing. That would be my favorite to explain. But still, it's relevant. I'm sorry to say again something about IQ and genetics. This might be the outcome of the mating patterns, educational homogamy.
Yeah.
Which may hamper somehow and cause barriers to educational mobility, because if two partners have higher education, they of course provide better conditions, motivations, even money for education. So what would be your
Yes,
explanation?
I think all three of those are plausible. My own focus has been mostly on the second, on the link between expanding inequality and declining mobility. Within the United States, there's some debate over whether mobility is actually declining. Most people thought mobility was declining until we got the results from Raj Chetty's recent study, where he used long-term tax data to examine income mobility, intergenerational income mobility, and he argues that mobility is flat, that it's not declining. Nonetheless, of course, that's not a happy story because mobility is low, and so if it's not getting better, then that's not good. But so it's not clear whether, and of course it could be that mobility in education is declining even as mobility in income is staying flat. That could also be the case. So they're not necessarily contradictory. Anyway, most of my focus has been on the implications of increasing economic inequality for decreasing social mobility. And I think there are good reasons to think that that is part of the story, because as inequality increases, the gaps become larger and larger barriers, right? It becomes harder and harder to make the leap to another social stratum. So that seems very plausible. In education, if you think about widening gaps between people of different social origins, so people from disadvantaged backgrounds falling further and further behind, whether in test scores or attainment, compared to people from more advantaged social origins, then you can imagine that being mobile would be harder because the chasm that they would have to transverse would be wider, right? So that's why I think the second argument is so strong. The third argument, though, about increasing educational homogamy, I think also, I think there are some who have made this case. You're probably more familiar with that literature than I am, but I'm at least aware of it. So the more people tend to marry others who are similar, whether at low levels of education or at high levels of education, the harder it is for their offspring to move up in the education system. So with respect to your first argument, I think that's only true if we take very crude, that there's a ceiling. That could only be true if we use very crude indicators of educational attainment. So if we only look at years of schooling, or if we only look at post-secondary versus not post-secondary, that could be the case in the not in the Czech Republic, obviously, but in the United States, where 86% of high school graduates get some form of post-secondary education. Now, people from disadvantaged backgrounds are at a lower level, but even among the lowest third of the socioeconomic distribution, 75% get some form of post-secondary education. So if you look at it that way, you could say, well, there's a ceiling. But of course, not all post-secondary education is the same. There are two-year colleges, there are for-profit colleges, there are non-selective four-year colleges, there are elite public colleges, there are elite private colleges. So if you allow a more nuanced understanding of post-secondary education, then there's not a ceiling. There's plenty of room. There is potentially plenty of room for upward mobility, but we're not seeing it.
So I don't see any other hands, so we are at the end. So for the end, I would have practical information, thanks, invitation, and thank you. So practical information is that the website will be shared on our institute website, on Fulbright website, and on US Embassy American Center website. So you can download it. Later on, we could post the link to the recording of the presentation where it will be posted, or previous one and that one. So that's the practical information. Thanks to Fulbright Commission for organizing a small refreshment in the back room. An invitation is, let's use another 30 minutes we have for informal talk and exchanges and further discussions that probably Adam's talk stimulated. But biggest thank you is for Adam, his talk, and
Thank you. Thanks very much, David. Thank you.
So please join the refreshment.
Thank you very much for the
Thank you.
presentation.
Oh, thank you.
I'm living part of my life in the U.S., so
Oh.
sometimes
Where?
near in San Diego.
Oh,
So
okay.
California. So
The opposite side from me, yeah.
But
Yes, a
I
blue
really-
state.
Yeah, I really feel like that voting orientation and voting behavior, maybe even through the children, it would be interesting to do some project where the children would ask their parents why are voting, how they are voting.
Yeah.
Just a thought that it seems like
Yeah.
a key pivotal.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you.
My husband tells me that under President Eisenhower there was like 90% taxation for the top 10 rich, right?
Yeah, something high,
The money
maybe
is missing.
80%. Yeah. President Clinton was able to raise taxes. President Obama raised taxes at the top income bracket.
But I think President Reagan was the key.
Yeah.
key
Well,
figure,
you could
right?
see in the
Are we still
1980s.
recording it? No, it's fine.
We could see in the 1980s that's
No,
when it ended.
yeah, it's dramatically.
Here in Africa, like between school tracking, and we are assessing children in the